Hey everyone, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. So today we have a channel first. We're going to open up and unbox the Retroid Pocket 2, and I'll give you some of my impressions with the device itself. It took about a month and a half to arrive here in Hawaii where I live. It came with a couple goodies because I did a pre-order, so it came here with this USB OTG adapter, which allows you to control or to plug in different controllers or other peripherals, and we'll get into that here in a minute. And then it also came with its own HDMI cable. And this is a micro HDMI cable, which is different than the connection you would use for the RG350, which is a mini HDMI cable. But yeah, came with those two. Let's get to the star of the show, which is the Retroid Pocket 2 itself. So this is a upgraded version of the RG350 architecture. It has a faster chip on it. I'll put all the stats here on the screen so you can see what it is, but you're probably familiar with this device already because it's been kind of blowing up on YouTube and in the different retro handheld spaces. So I got the yellow version. I really liked it. They call it the orange version, but to me it looks very yellow. The box is kind of unassuming, just has your button layout here on there. And yeah, let's open it up and have a look. Honestly, this is my second retro device ever that I've bought. So I obviously have the RG350. I make all these videos about it, but this is the next one where I thought, hey, this one looks promising enough that maybe we can try it out and add it to the channel as well. This is going to play all of the games that you can typically play on the RG350, and in addition to that, it should also play PSP, DS, and Nintendo 64 and Dreamcast games. So inside the box, you can see I got a glass protector, and then if you pull the device out of its actual little shell here, underneath there was an instruction pamphlet as well as the charging cable. So the manual itself there's not much to it. Honestly, I opened it up and I saw, okay, these buttons do this, and then it shows you an indicator of what to expect on the menu bar at the top, typical Android device there. And then this is just the charging cable, USB-C to USB-A. And looking at the device itself, so first thing I did pulling it off is just really get a feel for the buttons and comparing them to the RG350 in particular in terms of how they feel. Now I found that the buttons were much stiffer than what I was expecting. The D-pad is really kind of firmly set in there, and then the face buttons themselves are really flush with the face, and so there's not a lot of movement going on when you're pushing on the buttons. And so we'll see how that plays out when actually using it. But you can see it has a USB-C port that is used for both data as well as power, and then the HDMI input. Power button on top, volume toggles on top, and then your home, start, and select is on the bottom left there. Everything else is typical of what you would expect. I did like the shoulder buttons. I thought they felt pretty good. Now, one thing I noticed is that it does take a long time to boot up, and you'll see here I started a timer. I also timed my RG350 and RG350M. On average, those took 9 seconds to boot up, and that's going from turning on the button to being able to navigate the menus. And you can see here it took over 39 seconds to start up, and that is consistent. Every time I start up the device, it takes 39 seconds to boot up. So that's a little bit of a minus there. And then obviously this runs Android 6.0. They're looking at updating it to do Android 8.0 by October. When you first start up, it shows you some tips. It basically just says hold down on the home button for a few seconds, which will turn your left analog stick into a cursor. And that'll allow you to move it around, because obviously in the absence of a touch screen, you need some way to navigate a touch-based menu. And so their solution was to create a mouse pointer with the left analog stick. Overall, just playing with the buttons right here, I did feel that they are a little bit unresponsive. So there's some input lag. Like if you ever open up a computer that's old and it has a very low amount of RAM, you move your mouse cursor and it doesn't move as zippy and as quickly as you'd expect. And I was feeling that initially when I first started up, and I'm still feeling that. So the first thing I did, I didn't really know how this device worked, so I just started opening up the emulators to see what was loaded on there already. And there's nothing on there, so you can pull up. I pulled up the Nintendo 64 emulator, nothing. I tried the PSP one as well, nothing as well, which was odd because I had seen videos where people saying, oh, it comes with this preloaded library of games. So I tried out these different different apps. You know, here's RetroArch, and none of them were working. None of them had anything built into the SD card that I could find. And so I went online and looked a little bit more, and then I realized I needed to install what they call the Retroid app. And so you go into the toolbox and you open it up, and then there's this thing that says install the Retroid app. So I went and selected it, and then it told me that I needed to be connected to a network. So then I went and inputted my Wi-Fi and got connected to the Wi-Fi, and then tried the same thing again, and sure enough, it did allow it to work, as you'll see here in a moment. Overall, I found it really confusing. If I just had pulled this out of the box and started to try to play a game, it would have been impossible. I would have to have read some sort of guide in order to figure out how to make this work. And I think that's a bit of a failure just from a user interface perspective. Luckily, I'm going to start putting up guides on my own website, so hopefully people can find that and they can follow those instructions. So here I am opening up the Retroid Pocket app. Which actually reboots the system, and then from then on, every time you start up the system, it comes up with this new interface as opposed to the Android one. So there's two ways to kind of start up your system. So you can see here, I'm just kind of going through these initial menus, getting a feel for what it's saying. It's basically just giving you an understanding of how to toggle through this new user interface. It says that there are going to be certain games already loaded onto it, and this is how you can set up combinations to get them to work, and all the kind of things that you would need to know. This never pops up again, as far as I could tell. So you have to either read through and familiarize yourself with it initially, or you're going to have to try to look online and figure it out. And so this is what the interface looks like. And again, I had problems navigating it because I saw that there were some tabs on the top, and I figured out that the shoulder buttons allow you to tab through them, and it's all games, and then by console, and then I think it's by recent games. And I was having a problem with that because I couldn't figure out how to get beyond the initial console, which is the PSP. Then I realized you go into the actual menu itself, and then you push left and right on the D-pad, and that switches the system or the console over. So here I am with PS1. And these are all preloaded games, and 90% of them are fighting games, unfortunately. So unless you really have an interest in fighting games, you may have to go and figure out how to do this on your own. So I started trying to play around with this. I started with Nintendo 64 just because that's something that obviously does not run well on the RG350. And so I started up Super Mario 64 just to get an idea of how it felt, especially since I had already recently done a video including Mario 64 on the RG350. So I knew what my current playthrough capability was. And so this was going to give me an opportunity to figure it out on this new system. And you can see here it actually boots up really smoothly. The cutscenes and everything, there were no issues with the audio or the video, which was promising. I really like that. Now, obviously, Mario 64 is one of the easiest Nintendo 64 games to play, but it's an iconic game, and it's one that I really wanted to play. So I just did a little bit, first level and whatnot. Controls felt great. Honestly, not a fan of the analog stick or the face buttons on this. They just, they're very clicky, and they're very flush against the face itself. And so often it feels like you're not pushing hard enough to get it in. And so I almost feel like I'm pushing the button into the device itself. Like I think it's going to get dislodged and lost. Definitely not like that slightly mushy feel you get with the RG350, which is something I've come to appreciate over the last month or two that I've had that device. So from a gameplay perspective, everything felt great. I was pleasantly surprised with how well Mario 64 played in terms of frame rate and everything else. So let's test out a few more games. So I'm just patting over here. Now I'm going over to the NES, and it's not very obvious which system you're on unless you're familiar with the game, because there's nothing that says, oh, these are Nintendo games. You just have to know. So I started up Mario 3 and immediately realized that the coloring didn't look very good, and the speed of the game itself was way faster than I thought it would be. So I'm going to pull out my RG350 and I'm going to compare the two of them, and you'll see I'm going to do some audio checks for here real quick so you can hear the difference in the speeds here. So let me play it for you. Okay, so here's RG350. Now, obviously, I haven't done any tweaking for the emulators on the Retroid Pocket 2 yet, right? And I know there's a lot of information out there and a lot of opinions about how to make them play the best. But I'm just looking at it out-of-the-box perspective. I did not like the coloring that's on the screen. It seems a little bit yellow and green in the color spectrum compared to the RG350M, which I've always felt was a little warm anyway. And so this is even worse when I'm looking at the screen in terms of pure color fidelity and accuracy. And then in the gameplay itself, at least for this NES emulator, everything felt a little bit too fast, like a little bit turbo, which kind of, it didn't ruin the gameplay experience for me, but in playing a game like Mario 3, where it's a platformer that relies on fast instincts and button pressing and whatnot, I was not able to play it in the same way that I expected for my childhood. So one more screen comparison here. You can just see the difference in coloring here, putting the Retroid on the bottom. The colors are a little bit more flushed. The blacks are not as black, and it's a little bit yellow looking. Okay, so I wanted to see if this was an issue for all of the different emulated systems between the RG350 and the Retroid Pocket. So I started up Mario Kart on the Super Nintendo, and I did not have any of these issues. The screen coloring is the same. Overall, I think that's just a byproduct of the LCD panel compared to the 350M panel. But in general, the gameplay, again, the D-pad to me and the face buttons feel very stiff, and they're kind of hard to push. And so from a gameplay perspective, I felt like it was harder to control this game than it was in the RG350. And that may just mean that I need to acclimate to this control scheme. But for the most part, picking up between the two, I immediately felt like the RG350M felt much better. And obviously the 350M is a more expensive product. It's made with metal. It's a premium product. I understand all those things, but even comparing it against my regular RG350, I still felt like the button position and the feel of them overall was worse on the Retroid Pocket than the RG350 devices. So I just, dialed up a couple other emulators, so I checked, and Game Boy Color works fine. I did test Game Boy Advance, but I didn't record it, but it looked okay as well. I didn't see any major issues with it, other than in general, I didn't feel like the emulators were as sharp and crisp as the RG350, but I spent a lot of time customizing that device, and so it may just mean that I need to spend more time figuring out the right emulator for all of these systems. But you can see here, I'm just kind of going through all the different options you have here. And then another one I wanted to test out was Dreamcast games. So I never really played much time with the Dreamcast itself, but I figured I could at least tell you if the gameplay feels smooth. So here's Marvel versus Capcom 2, and it played just fine. I think that it was relatively smooth. There's only 2 Dreamcast games on this system that they've preloaded onto the system, which I think is an indication that those were the only 2 that they were able to get to play really well. I don't know. I'm gonna need time to play around with the emulators. I know there are guides out there, but again, I'm just looking at an initial perspective from somebody who's opening up the box and just trying to play some games. The other game that's loaded on the Dreamcast is a version of Ikaruga, which is a GameCube game that I'm very familiar with, and that played very poorly. I had to turn on frame skipping in order for it to get to work. In general, it felt about 3/4 speed of what it should be. But Marvel vs. Capcom 2 felt fine, at least with this initial emulator. And I know there are others out there, and I'll work on those later. But again, I just wanted to kind of get an initial impression. So I pulled up PS1 as well. So here's Tekken 3, which is one of those games in the RG350 that feel a little bit slow on the PS1 emulators, just because it's kind of a late system game, and so it's got a lot of data in it. And so it plays great on the Retroid Pocket. So I think that's thanks to the additional processor. So you can see here, this is me playing through HDMI. You don't hear any sound here, but I did get sound to work. I just didn't record the sound, unfortunately. It felt fine. I think the gameplay was smooth. And the one thing to know about this is when you have HDMI on, the screen itself does not turn off like it does on the 350. So it stays on, which is going to drain the battery more. Okay, so this is the second day. So I paused for a bit, got a little bit more familiar with it. I went and added a new SD card, and I moved all the files over. That way I had space to add more games. And so I added games into the actual ROMs directory on the SD card, which then allows me to use those built-in emulators I had tried the day before. So you can see here, opening up the Nintendo 64 emulator that's already on the device. I have not downloaded or installed any extra emulators at this point. This is just me trying to figure out how it is out of the box. And adding in some 64 emulators, or games, I should say. They played actually pretty well. I was surprised at how some of them worked. You can see here loading is pretty low or pretty long. And the thing is, too, you have to undo that whole pushing on the home button in order to get the mouse. You have to undo that in order to control the game. And it's a little bit finicky. You can see here I had to try several times to make sure I got it right. But once I got it going, you can see here I'm playing Ocarina of Time. Another game that did not play very well on the RG350, and it's playing fine. There are a little bit of audio stuttering issues, as well as a little bit of lag on the visual side, but not anything that's going to break the game. It's not super smooth, but at the same time, it's 100% playable, and I would say even enjoyable at this point. And kind of one of my favorite parts of this device so far is how well the Nintendo 64 games play. So you can see here with Ocarina of Time went pretty well. So then I tried F-Zero, and this is another game that did okay on the RG350, but I wanted to see how it played. And unfortunately, this one had a lot of issues. It's actually just a little bit better than the RG350 in terms of gameplay. The audio is stuttering a lot. The controls feel okay. I wouldn't say it's smooth by any means, but it was at least playable. But that audio was really bad, and it's an unfortunate thing. But I think if you really wanted to get your F-Zero on the Nintendo 64 fix, it's possible, but it wasn't a great experience. Okay, and then another game that I had tested on the RG350 is Paper Mario. And this one didn't have any gameplay issues, but it had graphics issues on the RG350. And some of those graphics issues remained in this as well. You can see how the kind of the sidewalk pieces there are a little bit weird looking. You can see the fountain's got that weird visual artifact. So I only just played this first part here, but verified that yes, the gameplay feels fine, and there are probably going to be some visual issues further on in the game. But overall, I think it's definitely playable and enjoyable. Okay, and then Wave Race 64, which is basically unplayable because of visual artifacts on the RG350, came out pretty well. I mean, it looks fine. Gameplay is smooth. I'm not really familiar with this game, so I'm just doing a terrible job. But overall, I think this one played nice and smooth, very similar to how Mario 64 plays, in that it's just about perfect. Okay, so opening up the PSP emulator and just playing a few games here. So I owned a PSP at launch when it first came out, so it's a system I'm very near and dear to my heart, so I was really looking forward to trying this out. So I tried with a launch game first, Lumines, which is one of my favorite puzzle games, and it played fine. I didn't add any frame skip or anything like that, and it seemed pretty good. There was no audio issues. The controls are fine. In general, again, like I've mentioned, I was not a fan of the buttons, and so the D-pad itself just feels a little too stiff, you know. And so overall, though, I think it was playable and enjoyable, and I do appreciate being able to play this game again. So then I went for something a little more difficult, like the Jak and Daxter game, and this is a 3D platformer, so I knew it was going to have some issues getting started. You can see here, starting it up, and this is with 0 frame skip, and it's unplayable, right? This is about a third as fast as it should be. And so I went in and actually updated the frame skip to 2, so a pretty hefty frame skip for a game, especially like this, which I knew would make it less fluid, but hopefully it would play at full speed. And you can see here I have to go into the settings, change it to frame skip, hit 2, and knock out of the settings. And the same thing here, you have to hold that menu or the home button in order to make the mouse part activate, and that's how you get into the menu. It's kind of a pain to get in and back out of that menu in terms of controls. But you can see here it's at least playable, but it was still very kind of stiff and not fluid at all. So I tried it again with another game. This is Outrun 2006. And this is with 0 frame skip, and you can see here it is just lagging, and the audio is terrible, so having a lot of issues. So did the same thing again, hold down the home button, then hit the B button to exit out, go to the settings, and then added my frame skip to 2. And you can see from the gameplay, it's again not great. It's almost full speed, you know, so it's running pretty well. But just especially on a racing game, it's very apparent when something is not running smoothly or running at full speed. And so this was both. It's not at 100% speed, and it's not smooth because of that 2-frame skip. So it's playable. I think you could get through it, but I don't think it's an enjoyable experience. So let me show you this OTG adapter, the last thing here. And so this plugs in here in the top, and that allows you to plug in USB devices. So I have this 8BitDo USB device here, and it's $20 on Amazon. I'll leave a link for it in my first impressions here down below. But I'll say that this thing is worth its weight in gold. I love this thing because it allows you to connect any modern Bluetooth controller to it and start working it immediately. So here I am with an Xbox One S controller, and it pairs up perfectly, and then controls were great. Everything worked just fine for it. I was able to verify it works with a PS4 controller, PS3 controller, Switch controller, and Switch Pro controller, all hooked up to this 8BitDo adapter. So if you don't have one, I would really consider it. But you can see here it's working just fine. Overall, I am happy with this device just based on the amount of money that I paid for it. It's not a huge amount. It's under $100, and I am able to play Nintendo 64 games. I think that there is some potential here once I work with the different emulators and the operating system gets updated. But yeah, let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. I'll be making more videos here in the future. And in the meantime, please like and subscribe if this was helpful to you, and we'll see you next time. Happy gaming.